Well, welcome to GTC's Teaching Tidbits. Each episode, we explore a technique, tip, practice, or idea from faculty for faculty. Today, we have a couple of special guests joining us from the Curriculum and Instructional Support Center, CISC for short. Our instructional designers, April Akins and Melissa Dukes. Good morning and welcome, April and Melissa.
Good morning.
It's such a pleasure to have you both on this episode. And I wanted to pause here for a second because this is the first time you've done any episodes in our series. So I wanted to ask if each of you would just tell us a little bit about your backgrounds. And April, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I'm April Akins, and we both actually started back in November here at Greenville Tech. My background has actually been all over the place. I will say I started in social work and did medical social working and some other things first, and then I moved into 911 dispatching for about 10 years, and then decided I need to go back into academics. So I became an academic librarian for almost 10 years before transitioning as an instructional designer. And I will say I've loved my career path all the way here, and I'm enjoying my time at Greenville Tech. So I'm excited to be here.
And Melissa, how about you?
And I am Melissa Dukes, also an instructional designer. My background is K-12 education. I spent 16 years as a first and second grade teacher and decided, you know what, I need a change. So at 40, I made a career change. Here I am, and I also am loving working for Greenville Tech and the job that we're doing as an instructional designer.
Great, thank you both. And I'm very excited to have you both on this episode. I can tell those who are watching, Melissa and April have been hard at work ever since they joined us in November, doing lots of great things over there. And we get excited here in CPE when we get to collaborate with them. So they're here today to share some insights into developing effective learning objectives for your courses. So April and Melissa, I am going to turn it over to you to share your teaching tidbits.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. We're going to just be talking about learning objectives, what they are, why we want to use them, and then how to actually incorporate them into your course, as well as how you can make alignments with those. And so we are coming in with a Quality Matters kind of background on looking at how these things will align. So that's going to help you moving forward with some of the courses, and if we start doing reviews with your courses as well. So what are learning objectives? Learning objectives are specific, they're measurable, observable student behaviors that describe a performance you want the students to be able to exhibit to show mastery of the content or the skill, and that are used in either the course level or the module or unit level. So depending on how you break your course down, you'll have some overview course objectives, then you'll have what we call module or unit or maybe even chapter objectives that you will then incorporate in your weekly, in the classroom time or the online modules that you're working from. So really focusing on that they're specific, they're measurable, and they're observable. Those are the important keywords kind of that definition for learning objectives. So why would you want to have learning objectives? So I've got a couple of reasons for you. First is to convey instructional intent to the students. You want the students to understand why they're learning what you're asking them to learn, why you're showing them these things. Second is to ensure that the learning is focused clearly enough that both the students and you as the teacher know what's going on. So you're prepared for what's going to be happening and they understand where you're going with the conversation that you're having in the classroom. And then to provide direction to your instruction. It's kind of your roadmap of where you're going. It just helps you stay on track, also helps your students stay focused. And then to provide guidelines for alignment of your assessments. You don't want to be measuring something in your assessments that don't align back to your actual coursework that you're covering in your information. So those are why you would want to have learning objectives set up in your courses. So when you're creating your courses, you're developing your courses, there's really three components that come together. Your learning objectives, your learning activities, which are what you're having your students do, whether that's reading course material, interacting in the classroom, doing discussion boards, any of those things that are the activity pieces to the learning environment. Then you also have your learning assessments. That's where you're checking to see, are they mastering that knowledge or that skill set that you're working on? So focusing on only one or two of those elements creates an imbalance in your course and diminishes the student learning process. So you want to make sure that you are including all three of these when you build your courses from the beginning. So that's why we want to focus on learning objectives today, because that's your roadmap for your entire course. So we start there. So identifying learning objectives. So we have this that we've written up that within a Blackboard course, your module, unit, chapter, or week learning module. So when you create your courses in Blackboard, you want to set them up in some sort of kind of uniform way. So module or unit or chapter week, that's how we kind of define them. It should include an overview page, which includes the learning objectives for that type of unit, whether it's a module, unit, chapter, or week. So just something simple that you can put at the beginning is, as a result of interacting with the assigned instructional materials and completing the learning activities for this module, unit, week, chapter, students will be able to do something. That's the objective. That's the behavior, the do something part of it. So the components of a learning objective, there's 4 components and they're kind of A, B, C, D, makes it a little bit easier to remember. So first is your audience. Who are you targeting with your learning objectives? In our instance, we're working with students. That's who we're wanting to be aware of what's happening in the classroom. The second is the behavior. So what should the audience be able to do? So the behavior should be observable and should be measurable as well. The third is the conditions. So under what conditions does the audience demonstrate mastery of the objective? So is that going to be given an exam, they would be able to answer these questions? Given this type of activity, they'll be able to do X, Y, Z with that. And then the degree. So how will the behavior need to be performed? So examples, the speed of it, the accuracy, the quality, or the quantity. So thinking what you're wanting as part of that result. So clarifying that to the students. I want you to be able to identify 5 components of this, and that gives them a clear understanding of what you're looking for with them. So when you start actually building your learning objectives, you'll want to begin with a statement. So here's just a simple broad statement to start with. By the end of this module, you'll be able to, and then the next step is add that action verb to it. And that can be identify. By the end of this module, you'll be able to identify. That's the behavior they're going to be doing something. And then end with that qualifier, that kind of degree of what it is they're going to be doing. By the end of this module, you'll be able to identify the 4 components of a learning objective. So very simple to kind of fill in those blanks, but that's a simple way to build a learning objective. So where do we get those action verbs from? Like, where do we think about those? You go back to Bloom's taxonomy and think about this pyramid that I have here, and this has some kind of small font, I think, but you look at creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding. Remember, we kind of hear these a lot, but this gives a little bit further onto that. So definitely kind of pause at this point in this presentation and take a look at that a little bit further. But creating, so putting information together in an innovative way, or applying, using the knowledge gained in new ways. So using it differently than just putting it back out there in an understanding or remembering way. But so these are some ways to think through what kind of verb you want to use in your learning objective. Some that are not observable and not measurable, which we are finding in some learning objectives that we've been looking at, and others that have given examples. So these verbs are not observable, and therefore you can't measure them. So when you're actually looking at assessments, you wouldn't be able to measure that the students are gaining this piece of knowledge. So if you use words like understand, know, grasp, appreciate, comprehend, gain knowledge of, or be familiar with, or just learn, how are you going to measure that or observe that the student actually did that? So consider that when you start building those learning objectives. You want to move away from those words. So now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
All right, so you have your objectives and they are a great verb. They're not on the X list, and you have, okay, I have a good learning objective. So what's next in the process? You want to make sure that you are testing those objectives. So ask yourself how I measure or test each objective. As you're writing the objectives, think, how will the students demonstrate mastery? So for example, I have one here. We see this quite a lot. the objective says explain or discuss, but then students are only given a multiple choice test. So can students really explain or discuss if all they have to do is pick A, B, or C as a choice? No, they can't. So you want to make sure these would not be aligned. You want to make sure to fix this, you could add essay questions or discussion posts so that what you're asking the students to do and then what you're testing matches or aligns. So if the objective is for the student to construct something, then the assessment should be students turning in a piece of work that they have created, not a true false test. So as you're thinking about your objectives, think about how you're going to test or measure those objectives to ensure that students are truly mastering what you want them to master. All right, so here's our learning objective. This is quiz time, so play along, those of you watching. So analyze a definition of religion using the categories of functionalist and substantive. That's a good one. Analyze is measurable. You can easily see if someone can do that. The assessment to go with it is a discussion topic. Here are the categories for the question for the discussion topic. In general, definitions of religion fall into two categories, functional and substantive. Do you think one of these is more helpful than the other? If so, which one and why? If not, why not? Could you use this assessment to meet the learning objective? Absolutely, because in your discussion, you would be able to analyze those different definitions. So they're aligned, they're connected. This is a great one. All right, here is another one for you. Your learning objective says conduct research using the GTC databases and appropriate websites. Conduct research, that is something that you can do, okay? It's measurable, but then you're given a multiple choice, true, false, and short answer test. Is this measurable? Is this aligned? No, it's not. Because if you're supposed to conduct research, that means you actually have to go and do something, and you can't represent that on a multiple choice or true, false test. List, here's your learning objective. List end of shift duties you must follow at your property. Your assessment is to sequence the end of shift duties in the correct order or answer multiple choice questions about the end of shift duties. Those align? Yeah, they do, because you're having a sequence and a list are basically the same thing. So yes, those would align. Oh, here we go. Are there other ways you can assess this objective? If so, think about how. Maybe you could write a short paragraph on how you, what the end of the shift duties could be. Maybe you could have a case study that gives the end of shift duties, and you can tell whether they're in the correct order or not. So there are a lot of ways that you can measure one objective. It doesn't always have to be a multiple choice or a true false test. There are lots of different things that you can do to measure those objectives. And then, so just to kind of follow up, you want to make sure that when you're looking at your objectives, that you're following the module, you're thinking about your students, you're thinking about after completing this objective, students will be able to. Keep that in mind as you're doing your assessments. And when you get to the assessment part, if you look at this and say, okay, I wanted my student to do X, Y, and Z, am I covering that? Did my assessment really make them do that? If it does, then they're aligned. If it does not, then they're not aligned, and you should either revisit your assessments or change your learning objectives to match what you're actually testing. That way students know from the very beginning, this is what is expected of me. This is how I get to that mastery of that by doing these activities, these materials related to the course, and then these assessments. They all connect back together so that the students have a clear understanding. This is how I get from A to B to B to C in this course. And so that's learning objectives in a nutshell. It's pretty simple when you really stop to think about it. I think a lot of times we don't necessarily think the whole process through, but once you do that, as you can see from our little examples, they're pretty simple. You can do it. I know you can.
Oh, thank you so much, both April and Melissa. You took what can almost feel daunting, I think, in a way, to brand new faculty or even existing faculty who haven't made changes to the learning objectives in quite a while. It can feel very daunting, and you made this you broke it down and made it so easy to digest, like a very simple process, as you said, and very helpful. So thank you for taking the time to kind of break all of that down for us. I know you're deeply embedded into learning objectives and reviewing courses as Greenville Tech really shifts to becoming fully quality matters. And I know this is going to be a helpful resource for faculty to reference back to, even in addition to being in contact with you and getting your assistance. So thank you so much for providing all of that detail. There was so much you packed in there today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, my pleasure. I hope we'll see you again on future episodes, because I know you'll have more to share. And I think you kind of set things up for maybe some additional episodes as well, just even thinking back to that pyramid. So I think we'll enjoy having you all back on in future episodes in the next season. Well, if you would like to continue the conversation with April and Melissa, or you have questions or need assistance, know that you can reach out to them. I've put their emails here on the screen for you, april.akins@gvltec.edu and melissa.dukes@gvltec.edu. You can also reach out to the department email, CISC@my.gvltec.edu, and one of the members of the wonderful CISC team over there will reach out with you and connect with you. And as always, if you have a teaching tidbit worth sharing, or you know someone who does, let me know. I would love to be able to reach out to them or you and invite you to do an episode for us and to share your thoughts with our fellow faculty. Well, that's this week's GTC Teaching Tidbit, and we will see you next time.
Bye.